Hello and welcome to a new episode of Nile TV Newsroom Live. I'm Raham Morsi, and if you're watching this episode for the very first time, or the show for the very first time, let me just reintroduce you to what this show is all about. The show is composed of a number of different segments, including a close look at what's happening in the world of politics, in addition to what's happening in the business world, and a closer look at what's happening as well in the tech world, and some interesting news when it comes to the culture and arts, in addition to the sports news. We're going to take a short break and get on with the show. And we're starting off with politics. The World Economic Forum in Davos opened on Tuesday with the war on Ukraine and climate change on the top of the agenda. In one of the opening speeches, Ukraine's First Lady, Olena Zelensky, appealed for support and unity from the international community. Swiss President Alain Berset said Russia's invasion of Ukraine had made the world face its worst crisis since the last World War, saying the post-World War order is currently experiencing its greatest crisis. Adding, Russia's war of aggression on Ukraine constitutes an attack on peaceful countries, but it is also a brutal attack on the international law and multilateralism. Earlier on Tuesday, a senior Ukrainian presidential aide said that over 9,000 civilians, including 453 children, had been killed since the Ukraine-Russia war. Back home, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi hosted a tripartite summit with the Jordanian King Abdullah II and Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas at Al-Ittihadiyya Presidential Palace in Cairo on Tuesday. The three leaders discussed the latest developments in the occupied Palestinian territories, in addition to a number of regional and international files of mutual concern. A final statement said President el-Sisi and King Abdullah asserted full support to the Palestinian efforts during the current delicate juncture in the Palestinian cause. They asserted the need for an international protection of the Palestinian people and their legitimate rights, adding that equally important is a real political horizon that re-kicks serious peace negotiations in the two-state solution. The three leaders said all unilateral Israeli measures would undermine the two-state solution or change the historical legal status of Jerusalem, and it is its sacred places are illegitimate and should be halted. The statement also said that they called for Palestinian unity and said serious measures are needed to alleviate the hardships that face Palestinian people living in the Gaza Strip. Both Jordan's king and the Palestinian president hailed Egypt's efforts to maintain the truce in Gaza and to continue the reconstruction of the Strip, asserting responsibility of international donors to help with these efforts. Over the UNRWA, the three leaders emphasized the role the agency plays in the provision of different services to Palestinian refugees, saying it should continue by virtue of mandate. They agreed that Egyptian, Jordanian, Palestinian consultations will continue within a tripartite formula on all levels, with the aim of forging a plan to activate efforts to resume the negotiations and to work with friends and partners to revive the peace process. And joining us over the phone is Dr. Mohammed Abdel Halim, a professor of political science at Zagazig University. Good evening to you, sir.
Good evening, ma'am.
Firstly, thank you for joining us here on Nile TV.
My pleasure.
President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, along with the Jordanian king and the Palestinian president, had held a trilateral summit here in Cairo, and there were a lot of topics up for discussion. But what do you believe are the most important issues that were discussed during the summit?
Well, perhaps the most distinguished issues that had been discussed today, would come out from the fact that, the absolute sense of belief of Egypt that the Palestinian cause is one of the most distinguished issues, actually, that would go into the heart and the fabric, actually, of the Egyptian safety and security. believing that, Egypt did not forsake the Palestinian constituents quite a long period of time, perhaps more than 40 years. And stemming out from this fact, the fact that Cairo would assume that sort of tripartite summit, actually, including the Jordanian side as much as the Palestinian, represented by Mr. President Mahmoud Abbas Abu Mazen, a sort of a summit in which almost the three leaders actually discussed mainly the development of the Palestinian cause in the light of the present time situation, as much as the tribulations of the present time and the confrontation that actually would come as what you might call an impediment that would face the problematic solution of the two-state solution. The importance actually of the summit at this particular stage would stem out from the fact that the assumption and the coming, or let me say the advent of Benjamin Netanyahu actually at the head of, the cabinet, of the Israeli cabinet, with his own notorious incommunicability actually, and what he was to be notoriously known of, throwing the impediments actually within the face of the two-state solution. But I think that the three presidents actually would confirm the fact that they would have to preserve and secure the central rights of the Palestinians, and the continuation of almost the joint contribution and the efforts actually, the view of achieving the absolute sense of peace and security based on, you understand, the sense of the return of the refugees and the two-state solution again. Mr. President Abdel Sisi actually with his own tripartite summit actually with King Abdullah II and Mr. President Mahmoud Abbas Abu Mazen, they would agree and confirm the fact that they would have to protect and safeguard actually the Palestinian society and the Palestinian people, and safeguarding as much as their own simple rights of returning again of the two-state solution, of the collaboration actually with the view of creating a sense of a political horizon that would restore the negotiations again. I would say
but sir, the recent case that was filed by the Palestinian Authority at the International Court of Justice, is this also part of the discussion, and could it affect the peace process between the Palestinians and the Israeli side?
Well, the fact there is a little cautiousness actually of the difficulty of the continuation of the political horizon and the deterioration that would inevitably follow, that would leave its own deep impact on state, on safety and security actually of the Palestinian people. But I mean, I think that what would seem to be quite looming large actually is their own importance and the necessity of confirmation of stopping all the procedures on the part of Israel that could be described as one-sided attitude, quite far away from being legal, quite, notoriously known for its own arrogance, actually, and their own throwing obstacles within the problem of the two-state solution. But I think the fact that they would confirm at the end of the day that they would have to preserve on the historical situation as much as the legal standpoint, situating on the equal rights within Jerusalem, the sacred areas and the Islamic parts as much as the Christian locations in the meantime. A sort of a summit in which perhaps the three presidents, including Mahmoud Abbas Abu Mazen, is very much deeply concerned with representing the Hashemite supervision actually on, historical places and sacred areas actually within Jerusalem. And in the meantime, the importance of the recommendation of the Palestinian reconfirmation and the reorganizing, rehabilitation of the house from within for it, and sorting out all the disturbances, the Palestinian chaotic experiences, and putting an end for the sort of the split between Fatah and Hamas in the benefit of almost all concerned, and for the interest of almost all the Arab people, actually.
Yes. Sir, you also touched on the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu is forming a government, and this is a very right-wing government at the moment that is taking office in Israel. How do you think this will affect the peace process? Will there be a give-and-take situation, or is the peace process completely halted given the right-wing situation in the Israeli government?
Well, we cannot really, deny that the advance of Netanyahu actually to the political stage would represent some disturbances that would loom large in the future. Particularly when he had been assisted for quite a long period of time by previous American administration president, that is Donald Trump, when he would transform, the capital from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, establishing Jerusalem as the eternal capital for the Israeli, I wouldn't say Israeli state, but the Israeli entity. This is one of the impediments actually that was caused some problematic situation within the fortification of the Palestinian side. But I think that His Own Excellency King Abdullah II, as much as Mr. President Mahmoud Abbas Abu Mazen, would, insisted now and again for the return again of the refugees and for the ceasefire, as much as thanking Egypt actually for its own great efforts and vital role of reconstructing Gaza Strip, of reaching to a consensus of opinion, of putting an end for the suffering and struggle and the ceasefire, a sort of a thing that would take quite a long period of time. A sort of a summit as well, actually, in which perhaps the three presidents would preserve the importance of the continuity of the international community for not only, the European community, but actually the whole Arab world, for fortifying and assisting actually the Palestinian cause, of fortifying in the meantime, the UNRWA, and of returning again to his own temporal right of safeguarding and of providing the Palestinian people, of establishing the standpoints of the Palestinian cause as being headed by the Eastern Jerusalem on the borderlines of the 4th of June of 1967, in the light of the international law and the, the major guidelines and the instructions of the international legalization, as much as the Arab International Summit, I would say.
Okay, Dr. Mohammed Abdel Halim, a professor of political science at Zakazig University. Thank you so much for joining us over the phone. We're going to take a short break and then move on with the rest of the episode. And Brazil's Supreme Court on Friday agreed to open an investigation into former President Jair Bolsonaro for his alleged involvement in the attacks on government buildings in January 8th. The story.
Brazil's former Justice Minister Anderson Torres, a member of ex-President Jair Bolsonaro's cabinet, was detained on Saturday for his alleged involvement in the attacks on government buildings on January the 8th. Torres arrived back in the Brazilian capital on Saturday after returning from vacation with his family in Miami, the United States. Earlier on Thursday, police found a draft decree in his house, which appears to be a proposal to interfere in the result of the October election that brought the current president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, to power. Brazil's Supreme Court has started an investigation into his actions and agreed to probe Bolsonaro for allegedly encouraging protests. However, both have denied any wrongdoing. The investigation was requested earlier on Friday by Brazil's Attorney General office. In the second round of voting in the Brazilian presidential election held October 30th last year, Bolsonaro was narrowly defeated by Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. He subsequently appealed to Brazil's High Electoral Court challenging the election results.
Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry said Egypt is striving to overcome current challenges that have largely impacted the world. In an interview with the American News Network that's on the sidelines of the Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week, Shukri explained that the economic reform program Egypt began in 2016 faces the repercussions of both the coronavirus and the Ukrainian crisis. The top diplomat, however, said that state efforts are exerted to overcome these challenges through attracting investments. Shukri, who is also the president of the UN Climate Conference COP27, stressed the need to put forth mechanisms needed to obtain financial aid that would help in tackling climate change challenges ahead of the upcoming conference COP28. The foreign minister added that Egypt aspires to be a hub for green hydrogen, noting to the Green Hydrogen Initiative launched by Egypt in cooperation with Belgium during COP27. China's population fell last year for the first time in 6 decades, a historic turn that is expected to mark the start of a long period of decline in its citizen numbers, with profound implications on its economy. The drop, the worst since China's Great Famine of 1961, also lends weight to predictions that India will become the world's most populous nation in this year. China's population dropped by roughly 850,000 to 1.4 billion at the end of 2022, according to the country's National Bureau of Statistics. Last year's birth rate was 6.77 births per 1,000 people, down from a rate of 7.52 births in 2021, and marking the lowest birth rate to record. China also logged its highest death rate since 1974, registering 7.37 deaths per 1,000 people, compared with a rate of 7.18 in 2021. Long-term UN experts see China's population shrinking by 109 million by 2050, more than triple the decline of the previous forecast in 2019. That's caused domestic demographers to laminate that China will get old before it gets rich, slowing the economy as the revenues drop and the government debt increases to take care of the rapidly aging population. Much of the demographic downturn is the result of China's one-child policy that it imposed between 1980 to 2015, as well as sky-high education costs that have put many Chinese off having more than one child or even having any at all. China's stringent zero-COVID policies that were in place for 3 years have caused further damage to the country's bleak demographic outlook, population experts have said. Although local government have since 2021 rolled out measures to encourage people to have more babies, including tax deductions, longer maternity leave and housing subsidies, the steps are not expected to arrest the long-term trend. U.S. climate envoy John Kerry said on Tuesday that time was running out for the world to tackle climate change. And he was not convinced it would get to a low-carbon economy in a time to avoid the worst impacts for some of the most vulnerable people. What was most needed to tackle climate change and deliver a low-carbon economy, according to Kerry, was money. The climate envoy was speaking during a panel discussion on the second day of the World Economic Forum in the Swiss resort of Davos. He said that they have to pull in the table and leverage further, and that's doable. But time is in fact running out. The European Union will also prepare a law to make life easier for its green industry and back it up with state aid and a European sovereignty fund to keep firms from moving to the United States, according to the head of the European Commission. Also today, Ursula von der Leyen said during a speech during the World Economic Forum that the move would be part of EU's Green Deal industrial plan to make Europe home of clean technology and industrial innovation on the road to a net zero emission by 2050. She said to help make this happen, the EU will put forward a new Net Zero Industry Act. The aim will be to focus investments on strategic projects along the entire supply chain. The EU is concerned that European companies will move to the United States, and the EU will therefore provide money for its industry as well, according to von der Leyen. But she noted that because not all countries in the EU bloc have the same capacity to support their companies using state aid alone, could result in unfair competition and fragmentation that would damage the European single market. Joining us over the phone is Dr. Ahmed Adli, a climate change expert, to talk to us more about this. Good evening to you, sir.
Good evening.
During the Davos conference, part of the focus was on climate change, where the U.S. Special Envoy John Kerry, as well as EU representatives, spoke about the need for green industry and green energy. Do you believe that there will be real actionable steps taken towards making the net zero emissions of 2050 goal?
Well, I do believe that the problem and the solutions are in the hands of the people who are talking about the issue. Because when it comes to the target of not exceeding the 1.5 degrees Celsius to avoid the very severe impact of the climate change before the end of the century, I believe that this is something that could be achieved if the people who have the resources and they have the know-how and they have also the will to do that can make the difference.
Yes.
But it is not the developing countries or the poor countries in Africa or in Asia or in Latin America. They are the ones who are going to make this target happening. It is within the power and the capacity of the United States, the EU, China, India, and so on. So this is how I believe that, you know, if the people talking and they was saying that we want to reach the 1.5 degrees, they have to show us how they are going to do that and how they are going to help the countries to reach this target.
Yes, which brings me, sir, like since you were talking about the poorer countries around the world, like Latin American countries and the African continent and so forth, part of the discussions during the Davos summit was shielding the most vulnerable from the effects of climate change, which means basically funding, which was also discussed during COP27. Do you think or expect that there will be more funding provided or more inclination to fund these most vulnerable countries?
We have been talking about the funding since 2009 when I attended the Copenhagen COP in 2009. The $100 billion approved at that time was a very big achievement as a decision or as a recommendation or whatever. But unfortunately, until now, the commitment was not fulfilled by the developed countries. And again, when we had the COP27, we want to see very clear commitment. We found some good intentions, but we don't see commitment in the sense of how much and how and when. And this is why we have been waiting to hear exactly developing countries from the different regions. We have been waiting to see how funding is going to be put in place, and also a clear mechanism to support countries to face the climate change impact and also the loss and damage.
Yes. But sir, the climate change activists that are on the ground there are saying that there are double standards when it comes to Davos, and this isn't the first time that these climate activists have protested during the Davos summit, saying that you're talking about climate change and net zero emissions and reducing carbon emissions generally, but you're taking private jets. Do you believe that there will be a change in the mindsets of these leaders, world leaders, when it comes to how they handle carbon emissions in real life?
Well,
I mean, just talking
I
isn't...
They have no choice. They have to do this. What they are trying to do is to only keep the situation and as we see it now, pending without having very clear decisions at the global level. I see countries like the United States and in Europe, they are very much working on the climate change impact and the climate adaptation to protect their own land. But I still wait, and I don't see that we will see in the near future a very clear commitment in how they are going to support the other countries. And this is why the definition of double standard is very clear in this situation, because They are not really treating the issue on a fair basis, and they are not helping the developing countries the same way they are helping themselves.
Okay, Dr. Ahmad Adli, a climate change expert, thank you so much for joining us over the phone. We're going to take a short break and move on with the rest of the episode. Still on Davos, but on the business and financial segment, as security is tight in the Swiss ski resort of Davos on Tuesday, the second day of the World Economic Forum, which welcomed the businesses and political elite until Friday. A record number of attendees are participating this year, which should include 52 heads of state or government, 19 central bank governors, and over 600 CEOs. The Swiss government has deployed some 5,000 military personnel to support local air police. Air Force jets will again circle above to enforce no-fly zones. Discussions are due to focus on short-term challenges, including how to avoid the risk of a global recession in 2023 and how to ensure that a failing global effort to tackle climate change is not set back even further by the energy crunch exacerbated by the Ukraine war and sanctions on Russia. Still on Davos, the World Trade Organization Director General Ngozi Iweala warned world powers not to engage in a subsidization race on Tuesday as countries seek to generate investments in their green energy transitions. At a World Economic Forum panel discussion in Davos on the Biden administration's Climate Act and a proposed European plan that will provide similar investment initiatives, she said, if it's a race, emerging markets and developing countries will not be able to compete in such a subsidy race. The European Union responded on Tuesday to U.S. moves to boost energy transition with its own plan to make life easier for green industry, saying it will mobilize state aid and sovereignty funds to keep firms from moving to the U.S. Asked about the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act, Belgian Prime Minister Alexander Croo said he welcomes the country's willingness to include decarbonizing the trade agenda, but insisted that they should talk on certain elements which might look a bit unfair. Speaking in the same event, the German Economy Minister Robert Habeck said stabilizing gas prices in Germany gives Europe hope of a less intense shock of a recession that is threatening the continent. And in the U.S., Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said on Friday that the United States will likely hit the $31.4 trillion statutory debt limit on January 19th, forcing the Treasury to launch extraordinary cash management measures that can likely prevent default until early June. Once the limit is reached, Treasury will need to start taking certain extraordinary measures to prevent the U.S. From defaulting on its obligation, according to a statement Yellen wrote to members of Congress. She urged lawmakers to act quickly to raise the debt ceiling to protect the full faith and credit of the U.S. Republicans, now in control of the House, have threatened to use the debt ceiling as leverage to demand spending cuts from Democrats and the Biden administration. This has raised concerns in Washington and on Wall Street about a bruising fight over the debt ceiling this year that could be at least disruptive as the protracted battle of 2011, which prompted a brief downgrade of the U.S. credit rating and the years of forced domestic and military spending cuts. Joining us over the phone is Ambassador Mahmoud Ayoub, the former minister plenipotentiary at the Egyptian Commercial Representation. Good evening to you, sir.
Good evening to you and to the viewers.
The U.S. seems to be hitting the usual, which is the $31.4 trillion statutory debt limit. And now they're strapped for cash and trying to avoid a debt default. If they don't find some sort of solution within Congress, what does this actually mean for the U.S. economy if they default?
Of course, for a country like the United States with a very big deficit of 31.4 trillion, 31 and 12 digits to the right of 31. It is a per capita of about $94,000 for every single person in the United States. They, of course, they will find a way. There are many ways in which they can use to avoid default in public debts. By the way, it is the public debt of the United States which is increasing every year as a result of mismatch between spending and revenues. But why? Why there is this increasing deficit in the public debt? It is a result of predictable structural factors, mainly aging of the generation. Second, rising healthcare costs. Third, which is very important, tax system that don't bring enough money to pay for what the government has promised its citizens. This debt, how much is it of a gross domestic product? It is 100% of U.S. domestic product last year, 2021. So now it is more than gross domestic product of the United States, the public debt. Three major drivers of this growing debt, national debt, are demographics, like aging of generation, rising healthcare costs, which we are all aware of, and inadequate revenues, which is very important. Taxation system does not bring enough money to the coffers of the government, of the federal government. That is why there is deficit, and will I say, it is increasing by minute. Every minute, the public debt is increasing. And this means that the government has to face it in the Congress.
Of
course, there is a
problems.
politics in it. The Democrats and the Republicans, they are making a feud about it. But at the end of the day, we find that there is a public debt which has to be faced. The first thing to do is just to cut the spending. This is the urgent measure which can be taken by the government, any government, cut spending, and at the same moment try to increase the revenues in every possible way to face, so that to avoid facing what they have faced before.
Sir, if we take a look at what's happening when it comes to the U.S. economy at a more macro look, I suppose, in 2022, we saw the Federal Reserve raising interest rates as a measure to contain the inflation and slow down the recession, which has been successful relatively when it came to the U.S. economy. But these tactics had a great effect on the world economy. If this trend continues on, do you believe that the world economy will go deeper into recession?
I think that is heading towards some form of recession. World. The Federal Reserve Bank of America has increased the interest rate more than once this year, with just 0.5% every time. But it did not bring the hoped results, but it spelled out its effects to all the world. That is, all the world now is facing recession, although to different degrees in each country, as according to its structural power. But the end result is that the world is heading towards recession, and each country should be taking measures to avoid the adverse effects of recession on its citizens. But it is predictable, and it will happen sometime. It is happening now in the United States, as we have seen, and all the world is facing it. Even China is facing it in different way. Russia is doing that. Egypt is successfully facing the recession with many public projects, and it is hoped that it will not last as the recession of 1934 or the one in 41 has emerged, that the world was facing the recession, and it should be faced from the moment by wise policies of the government according to what it has. In the case of the United States, we cannot avoid the fact that it is a big exporter, and even exports dollars to the whole world and get materials in return. But they are facing the results of their very austere the policies which they followed during the last, let's say, half.
Unfortunately, I have to cut you off there because we're running out of time. So I have to thank you, Ambassador Mahmoud Ayoub, the former Minister Plenipotentiary at the Egyptian Commercial Representation. Thank you so much for joining us over the phone. We're going to take a short break and get on with the rest of the episode. And moving on, the next item we have is where the Yoon announces of South Korea that UAE invests $30 billion in South Korean industries, and announced that the UAE's decision to invest in South Korea as the two countries seek to expand economic cooperation. In a speech on Monday during the UAE-Korea Business Forum in Abu Dhabi, Yoon hoped that the latest Emirati investment will generate many results in the global market. Both countries should further strengthen the cooperation on a variety of energy sources based on the joint declaration of comprehensive strategic energy partnership to achieve the carbon neutrality goal of 2050. Details of the investment plan were not immediately known, but Yoon's press secretary said in a statement that the investments will be directed at nuclear power, defense, hydrogen and solar energy industries, among others. Seoul's finance ministry said that the $30 billion investments would be led by the sovereign wealth funds, including a number of other companies. The South Korean leader met with his UAE counterpart, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, on Sunday, during which the two countries signed 13 memorandums of understanding. Moving on to the world of technology, the European Union will prepare a law to make life easier for its green industry and back it up with state aid and the European Sovereignty Fund to keep firms from moving to the US, according to the head of the European Commission on Tuesday. Here's the story.
Ursula von der Leyen said in a speech at the World Economic Forum in Davos that the moves would be part of an EU Green Deal industrial plan to make Europe the home of clean technology and industrial innovation on the road to net zero CO2 emissions by 2050. She said to help make this happen, they'll put forward a Net Zero Industry Act. The aim will to be focusing investment on strategic projects along the entire supply chain, specifically looking at how to simplify and fast-track permitting for new clean tech production sites. The EU is concerned that European companies will move to the United States, which has a $369 billion scheme to subsidize green production. The EU will therefore provide money for its industry as well, adding that to keep European industry attractive, there is a need to competitive and others and offer incentives that are currently available outside the European Union. She noted that because not all countries in the 27-nation EU have the same capacity to support their companies, using state aid alone could result in unfair competition, fragmentation that would damage the EU single market. She didn't give any details of the fund, an idea she first raised in September. The European Union needs to work and trade with China on clean tech and push for a level playing field rather than seek to decouple from the world's second-largest economy. Von der Leyen added that China had made boosting clean tech innovation and manufacturing a key priority in its 5-year plan.
A small AI humanoid robot that learns from its users strictly by hand gestures and voice commands found its way onto the floor of the CES forum in Las Vegas. The goal of the demo is to demonstrate the possibility for people to access AI in a very easy way. You can teach a robot to do something only through gestures and voice. So no coding, no need to write any code lines, just using the most natural things a man or a woman can have. The goal with Titan Boy, who stands just over 1 feet tall, is to open the door to a technology that is scalable for other uses more broadly. In the arts and cultural world, a thermal drone deployed by Thai marine officials captured on Saturday a leatherback sea turtle, the largest turtle species on Earth, laying eggs on a beach in Bang Nang province. Leatherback sea turtles are classified as vulnerable on the International Union of Conservation of Nature, with populations declining due to habitat loss, poaching and plastic pollution. The leatherback turtle, spotted on Saturday, had found its way to the shore and dug a nest in the sand to lay her eggs. The eggs will incubate for the next 55 to 60 days before hatching, according to the Department of Marine and Coastal Resources in Thailand. A study from the frontiers in the conservation science found a thermal drone was able to record more information than labor-intensive human patrolling techniques, as its sensors can detect the body heat of warm-blooded animals, or more specifically, the thermal differences between animals and their surrounding environment despite the darkness. It was also crucial for sea turtles to remain undisturbed while nesting and to avoid the use of any light-creating devices at night. And in Sri Lanka, Hindus across the country took part in a harvest festival on Sunday, gathering at temples for religious rituals. Known as Makar Sankranti, the festival is held on one of the most auspicious days on the Hindu calendar and marks the transition from Sagittarius to Capricorn during the winter solstice in the northern hemisphere. People at the temple said they hoped that sun's transition would bring them better fortune. While the traditional Hindu calendar is a lunar calendar, Makar Sankranti is a solar event which takes place every year January 15th, known as Pongal in the Tamil community. It's a celebration to thank the sun, nature, and farm animals. And in sports, Egypt faced USA in the Handball World Championship today. The Pharaohs had kicked off their campaign in the World Championship on Friday, where they had stunned Croatia 31-22. The two heavyweights clashed in Group G. Egypt then played against Morocco at the second round of the Handball World Championship in Sweden on Sunday, winning 31-19. And finally, Novak Djokovic soaked up thunderous applause in his first match back at the Australian Open after last year's deportation drama, as a 9-time champion outclassed Roberto Caraballas Vienna 6-3, 6-4, 6-0 on Tuesday in a flawless start to his title bid. Returning to Melbourne Park, where the prolific Serbian was denied a title defense in 2022 after being sent home amid public fury for not having a COVID-19 vaccination. Djokovic saved 3 early break points to win the first set as fans sang his name. Striking the ball superbly throughout, Djokovic underlined his credentials as favourite to win the title, which would take him level with holder Rafa Nadal on 22 majors, but wrestling Caraballas Baena into submission in a one-sided thread. Well, this brings us to the end of this episode of Nile TV Newsroom Live. Hope you enjoyed this episode, but stay tuned for more here on Nile TV.